16 days to go. Donald Trump holding rallies right around the country. Joe Biden with this, well, lower profile campaign, even though he outrated Donald Trump in those dueling town halls, if you like, and we're gearing up for the second actual debate. Let's get into the US election. Joining me live now, Outsiders host James Morrow and Sarah Rivers, who is at the US Election Action Organiser. Thanks both very much for your time. Look, before we get into a few of the issues that might decide this, we'll start, of course, with the usual predictions. James, I noticed you were talking about a few different factors that people might not have factored in as much this time around, but you think the shy Trump voter is still going to play a part? This is even though a lot of the polling companies have adjusted for the non-college educated?
Well, if you look at some of the polls, you actually see that the college-educated white males are actually starting to come back to Donald Trump in a number of states. You look at the overall polls, they're holding firm at around a 9% lead for Biden, but I haven't spoken to anybody on either campaign who actually believes that this sort of lead is possible or trustworthy. When you start to go state by state, you see these leads tightening, and once you start to factor in a bit of that shy Trump factor and a few other things, including increasing Republican registrations, and in many states, where you can see which parties are sending in their ballots early, you're not seeing the huge Democrat advantages that they thought in certain states. It really starts to become a far more complex picture, Tom, and I don't think this idea that Biden is going to walk into this, should be countenanced, especially because we were here 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we would have been having the exact same conversation. There's no way Hillary's not going to win. Who is this blowhard Trump, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, that's true. Look, a lot of people have noted the margin in a lot of these places a bit more significant. What's the confidence, do you think, on the Democratic side then, Sarah?
Look, I think that's a great point, I guess, in terms of some of the kind of confidence that we had 4 years ago going into this now, sort of in the same place. There is a scenario, I feel, where Trump does win through the Electoral College, and admittedly, a lot of Americans are still somewhat confused by the idea that that's possible, and I think we kind of saw that shock and awe 4 years ago, so hopefully we see them come out to the polls.
Yeah, well, we will see. Look, I want to get into some of the issues because these next topics have been announced for the debate. So this is what the two candidates will be talking about. COVID-19, again, the response to this, James. Look, you can talk about Donald Trump and how he's personally fought it off. He was even boasting about how Barron fought it off as well, and it's good to hear. We know it's often not affecting children too much, and that would have been a relief. But there are many measures in which the US fares quite poorly compared to the rest of the world on COVID-19.
Well, yeah, look, absolutely. I would say that probably if you look at the overall numbers, the United States comes around the middle of the pack of advanced nations. But the real reason why so much of the United States has done really poorly has been because of the really incompetent management of it by a number of Democratic governors. If you look at the top 10 states for coronavirus deaths per million, 7 of those top 10 states were Democrats. The worst was New York State, and then right next to it, New Jersey. Andrew Cuomo, at the start of the pandemic, ordered nursing homes to take positive coronavirus patients with predictably tragic results. America's results would not look anywhere near as bad as they do if it wasn't for the horrible management of the pandemic by a Democrat.
High in a lot of Republican states, aren't they, James?
The case numbers are high, but are the fatalities? See, this is the thing. We're seeing cases
improved.
Well, treatment's improved. They didn't put them in nursing homes like they did in the Democratic states. The virus itself seems to be changing its nature. You look in Western Europe, you see, huge numbers of cases increased in say France, but in France the number of deaths are very, very minimal at the moment as a result of this. So it does seem that we've learned the lessons of the first wave, and now we're getting into this point where we can live with it. The left, the Democrats, whether they're here in Australia, in Victoria, or in the United States, they seem to want this thing to go on and on forever, keep the economy locked down forever and ever, and keep everybody on some sort of government payment rather than letting them get on with their lives and get out and earn a living. And I think Americans are going to be voting against that.
So, Sarah, I guess the key question is you can talk about the handling, and there are some issues around, states versus federal and so on, but what will Joe Biden do differently from here on in that will convince voters to support him?
Yeah, I think Biden absolutely has to win voters' confidence back in regards to the COVID response. And what I feel, I guess, as an American in Australia, is there really seemed to be a lack of a cohesive federal response in the U.S., which we are seeing the results of now. So I believe what Americans are searching for is really some, leadership to I suppose, give them sort of the reassurance of the future, as well as demonstrate that a bit more confidence in terms of the response. And I believe also with Trump, a lot of the topics, unfortunately, in terms of the mask debate, were politicized, which is quite unfortunate.
But does that, again, where does that leave voters going forward? That is the Biden campaign at risk of just pointing out mistakes that have already been made, and voters say, okay, sure, but what's going to happen when you're in? What will you change?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think first and foremost, we can start with the spread of misinformation, really, under the current presidency in regards to some of the topics in Australia, which we kind of feel are, believe common sense are readily believed to be true, which is that, of course, wearing a mask in public is going to reduce your risk of transmission, as well as catching the virus. So it's interesting that has been politicized in the U.S., and I feel if we can move away from some of those topics.
I just was going to say that, Joe Biden has gone two different ways on this whole thing with masks. He said, there shouldn't be a mask mandate. Then he said there should be a mask mandate. And I just wonder if Americans, who are in states that aren't terribly affected or are not terribly dense, are going to be, in terms of population, are going to want to have, the federal government saying you have to wear a mask when you're outside, even if there's nobody necessarily around. I just don't know that that's going to wind up being a winner for Joe Biden.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose whether or not that's mandated will probably likely in the U.S. be up to the individual state, as you mentioned. But what we saw with Trump, even most recent as the last debate prior to catching COVID, as we know, was that, he was bragging essentially about not wearing a mask in public. So that kind of leadership, I believe, is something that we can and hopefully will move away from under Biden.
You had him, you got this curious case, there's Donald Trump at the moment, he won't say whether he had a confirmed negative test before the last debate. It seems a bit strange, doesn't it, James?
No, I think actually he did. I think they later then cleared that up. I think that was fine, but he's recovered, and I think everybody should be glad that he recovered, and he recovered well. And I think what he showed Americans and the world is that, even if you're in your 70s, even if you're a big guy, and we know obesity is a risk factor around your COVID prognosis, and we know that Donald Trump's eating habits have never been the most, shall we say, abstemious. Even for him, this was not really that big a deal. And the message that Trump, I think, is giving Americans who want to move on is actually, we can live with it. If you get it, it's not necessarily a death sentence. Treatments will get better. And, we can't just stay, as we say here in Australia, under the doona forever.
Yeah, he's, I guess maybe it's an ad for being a teetotaler, because it's not the best diet, but doesn't imbibe. Maybe that happens. Let me just get you finally on another topic that will be up at the debate, climate change. Do you think it's fair to say, James, Donald Trump's not trying to convince anyone of the bona fides of him taking strong action? I mean, some of the things he's done is relaxed vehicle emissions standards for cars and trucks as well. There's relaxed standards around power,
and he got
major power distributors in terms of the emissions there.
Yeah, look, and he got out of the Paris Agreement, and yet, at the same time, America's emissions have gone down. So, in that sense, he's been a real success in terms of what you actually want, which is emissions declining. Now, the real worry we have with Joe Biden, and Joe Biden really needs to clean this up. He's got this short-esque thing he does where he says, I'm for fracking to some audiences, like he's trying to get Pennsylvania votes, and I'm against it to other voters because he's trying to get their sort of, more urban votes. He has endorsed the Green New Deal. The economics of this are just diabolical. God help us if that actually gets up.
What do you think of what Joe Biden's had to say? There's talk about the shale oil, but fracking in particular, Sarah, is he having a bet each way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Biden seems to be walking the line at the moment in regards to fracking, and we have seen that specifically, as you know, some of the key swing states such as Pennsylvania. It makes sense politically in terms of why he might do that. But obviously the risk is, of course, alienating his key Democratic base, because much of the young Democrats, progressive Democrats, really are behind this Green New Deal and want to see that kind of sweeping change. So, we want to make sure they're motivated to get out to the polls.
All right, there are a few other topics. We don't get time for them all. The debate, of course, will have coverage of it. It includes American families, race and American leadership as well. So I'm sure they're busy preparing their talking points. James Morrow, Sarah Rivers, appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.